My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. I was sitting at our family dinner table last Sunday when my mom turned to me with that familiar look of disappointment. My sister Stephanie had just announced her pregnancy, and Mom was practically glowing as she gushed about how perfect everything would be. Then came the question that shattered my carefully built walls: "When's your turn, Jessica?" The room fell silent as I looked up from my untouched plate. "It already happened, Mom," I said quietly. 3 times. The shocked expressions around the table told me everything I needed to know about how little my family truly understood my pain. Before I dive into this story that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please hit that like button because this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell because what happened next will shock you about how far family can go to destroy each other. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. To understand why that moment was so devastating, I need to take you back 2 years to when I experienced my first miscarriage. I had been 8 weeks pregnant and absolutely thrilled. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, planning how I would tell my family about their first grandchild. I had bought a little onesie that said "Best Grandparents Ever" and imagined their faces lighting up with joy. But life had other plans. The bleeding started on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday, my dreams of motherhood were gone. The doctor was kind but clinical, explaining that miscarriages in the first trimester were common. I decided not to tell my family, thinking I would wait until the next pregnancy to share the good news. I never imagined there would be 2 more losses after that. My family has always been divided into 2 clear categories: Stephanie, the golden child, and me, the disappointment. Stephanie became a successful cardiologist, married Robert, a wealthy attorney who drives a Tesla and wears suits that cost more than my monthly rent. They live in a sprawling house in the suburbs with perfectly manicured lawns and a 3-car garage. Meanwhile, I'm a freelance graphic designer struggling to make ends meet in a cramped studio apartment. My recent breakup with David had left me feeling even more inadequate in my family's eyes. Mom never missed an opportunity to compare us, always finding ways to highlight Stephanie's achievements while dismissing mine as cute hobbies. As I sat there watching my family process what I had just told them, I could see the wheels turning in their heads. Mom, whose name is Diana, immediately shifted into damage control mode. "Jessica, honey, those weren't real pregnancies," she said with that patronizing tone I knew so well. "If they weren't meant to be, then God had a plan. You can't compare early miscarriages to Stephanie's blessing." My father Frank tried to mediate, suggesting we focus on the positive news, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He never knew how to handle emotional situations and always defaulted to peacekeeping. What I didn't notice at the time was Stephanie discreetly holding her phone under the table, recording everything. Her face showed what appeared to be sympathy, but I caught glimpses of something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, saying all the right words about how sorry she was and how she had no idea I had been going through this alone. But her eyes told a different story. Later, I would realize that this moment of vulnerability, this raw confession of my deepest pain, was exactly what she had been waiting for. I spent the next hour trying to explain the emotional toll of losing 3 babies, the silent grief that had consumed me for 2 years, and the hope I still carried that someday I would become a mother. I talked about the guilt, the self-blame, and the isolation that comes with pregnancy loss. I thought my family would finally understand why I sometimes seemed distant at gatherings, why baby showers were torture for me, and why I flinched every time someone asked about my love life or future plans. Instead, Mom continued to minimize my experience, suggesting that I was being overly dramatic and that I should be focusing on supporting Stephanie during this special time. The conversation eventually shifted back to discussing nursery themes and baby names, leaving me feeling more invisible than ever. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone, thinking something terrible had happened to someone in my family. Instead, I discovered that something terrible had happened to me. The first text was from my college roommate, Jess. "What is this video? Are you okay?" Attached was a link that made my blood run cold. The video was titled "Crazy Sister Ruins Perfect Baby Announcement" and had already been viewed over 50,000 times in the 12 hours since Stephanie posted it. The video showed me at the dinner table, but it had been edited in the most devastating way possible. All of Stephanie's cruel responses and Mom's dismissive comments had been cut out. What remained was me appearing to interrupt Stephanie's happy announcement with what looked like a jealous rant about my own losses. The way it was edited made me look unstable, attention-seeking, and vindictive. Stephanie had added a caption that read, "When you try to share good news but your sister can't handle not being the center of attention. Some people will do anything for sympathy. Prayers for our family during this difficult time." The comments section was a nightmare of strangers calling me everything from psycho sister to baby killer. My phone rang constantly as the video spread across Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. People were sharing it with crying laughing emojis, making jokes about toxic family members and attention-seeking behavior. Someone had even turned it into a meme with my face photoshopped onto various dramatic movie posters. The humiliation was crushing, but the professional damage was immediate and devastating. By noon, I had received calls from 3 clients canceling their contracts. One of them actually referenced the video, saying they couldn't work with someone who seemed emotionally unstable. My boss Sarah called an emergency meeting that afternoon. She explained that several clients had reached out expressing concerns about my personal drama affecting their projects. Sarah tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. In the freelance world, reputation is everything, and mine was being destroyed in real time. The design agency where I picked up overflow work quietly removed me from their preferred vendor list. Within 24 hours, I had lost approximately 60% of my income. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that while I was being publicly humiliated for my pregnancy losses, my family was circling the wagons around Stephanie. Mom called me that evening, but not to offer support. Instead, she lectured me about how I was embarrassing the family and suggested that I should apologize to Stephanie for ruining her special moment. Dad sent a text saying he hoped I would find a way to be happy for my sister instead of making everything about myself. Even extended family members were sharing the video and commenting about how they always knew something was off about Jessica. The harassment campaign began that same day. Anonymous accounts started messaging my remaining clients with warnings about my mental instability. They sent screenshots of the video along with made-up stories about my allegedly erratic behavior. Someone created a fake Yelp page for my design business and flooded it with 1-star reviews claiming I had breakdowns during client meetings. The messages to my personal accounts were even worse. People were calling me a murderer, saying I deserved to lose my babies, and sending graphic images related to pregnancy loss. The cruelty of strangers was overwhelming, but the betrayal by my own family felt like a knife to the heart. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more isolated, my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my door with a casserole and a gentle smile. She was an elderly woman who had lost several pregnancies in the 1970s, and she understood the unique grief that comes with pregnancy loss. "Mija," she said, "what your sister did was wrong. Your pain is real, and you deserve to be heard." It was the first moment of genuine compassion I had received since the nightmare began, and I broke down crying in her arms. Determined to rebuild my life and my sanity, I made an appointment with Dr. Patricia Williams, a therapist who specialized in grief counseling and family trauma. Our first session was a revelation. Dr. Williams helped me understand that my family's reaction wasn't just insensitive but actually abusive. She explained concepts like gaslighting, scapegoating, and how toxic family systems operate. For the first time, I began to see that the problem wasn't me being too sensitive but rather a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic that had been in place for years. I threw myself into rebuilding my client base, taking on smaller projects at reduced rates just to keep money coming in. The work was beneath my skill level, but I needed to prove I could still function professionally. I also started researching legal options. The video was clearly defamatory, and I had a strong case for harassment. Several lawyers offered free consultations, and most agreed that I had grounds for both civil and possibly criminal charges. The thought of taking legal action against my own sister felt surreal, but the alternative was letting her destroy my life without consequences. That's when Stephanie escalated her campaign. 3 weeks after the video went viral, I received a certified letter informing me that she had filed for a restraining order against me. The court documents claimed that I had been threatening her and her unborn child and that I was displaying increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior. As evidence, she submitted screenshots of text messages that had been manipulated to look threatening. Messages where I had said things like "I hope you understand how much this hurt me" were edited to read "I hope you hurt." A text where I had written "I can't believe you would do this to family" became "I can't believe you would do this. Family should pay." The restraining order hearing was a nightmare. Stephanie arrived in court looking perfectly composed, dressed conservatively with her hand protectively on her growing belly. She testified with tears in her eyes about how scared she was of me, how I had a history of mental health issues, and how she feared for her baby's safety. Her attorney presented the doctored text messages as evidence of my escalating threats. I didn't have a lawyer yet and tried to represent myself, explaining that the messages had been altered, but the judge seemed skeptical. When I tried to present evidence of the original messages, Stephanie's attorney objected on technical grounds, and the evidence was excluded. The temporary restraining order was granted, which meant I couldn't come within 500 feet of Stephanie, her home, or her workplace. Since she worked at the same hospital where several of my clients were based, this effectively cut off another source of income. But the professional sabotage was just beginning. Stephanie began calling my new clients, introducing herself as my concerned sister and explaining that I was going through a severe mental health crisis. She told them about the restraining order, painting herself as a victim who was only trying to protect her family from my unpredictable behavior. Within a week of the restraining order, I lost 3 major contracts. One client was particularly cruel, telling me they couldn't work with someone who harasses pregnant women. Another said they needed someone more stable for their campaign. The third simply stopped responding to my emails entirely. I was hemorrhaging money and running out of options. The stress was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to concentrate on the work I still had. The situation reached a breaking point when my family staged an intervention. Dad called and asked me to come to their house for a family meeting. When I arrived, I found not just my parents but also Dr. Mitchell, who Stephanie had introduced as a family friend but was actually a psychiatrist colleague of hers. The entire setup was designed to make me look unstable and to justify having me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Mitchell, who had clearly been briefed by Stephanie, asked leading questions about my emotional state and my ability to cope with stress. Every answer I gave was twisted into evidence of mental illness. When I expressed anger about the restraining order, he noted my aggression. When I cried while talking about my miscarriages, he wrote down emotional volatility. Dad sat in uncomfortable silence while Mom nodded along, completely convinced that they were helping me by forcing this humiliating evaluation. I realized I was in serious danger when Dr. Mitchell started talking about 72-hour holds and crisis intervention. The combination of the viral video, the restraining order, and now this psychiatric evaluation could result in me being involuntarily hospitalized, which would destroy what remained of my career and my credibility. I excused myself to the bathroom and called the one person I thought might help, my ex-boyfriend Marcus. Marcus and I had dated for 2 years before breaking up 6 months earlier. Our relationship had ended amicably over different life goals, and he had always been supportive of my career. When I reached him that night, frantic and scared, he didn't hesitate to come get me. As we drove away from my parents' house, he revealed something that changed everything. "Jess," he said, "there's something I never told you about Stephanie. She tried to seduce me twice while we were dating. She said you didn't deserve happiness and that she could give me everything you couldn't." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, but it also clarified so much about the pattern of sabotage I was finally beginning to see. With Marcus's help, I began to investigate Stephanie's history of manipulation and sabotage. Our first breakthrough came when we contacted her college roommate, Amy, who had remained friends with Stephanie on social media but hadn't spoken to her in years. Amy was initially hesitant to talk, but when I explained what was happening, she opened up about disturbing patterns she had witnessed during their time at medical school. Stephanie always had to be the best at everything, Amy told us over coffee. But she didn't just work harder to excel, she actively tried to sabotage other people's success. There was this girl in our organic chemistry class who was consistently getting better grades than Stephanie. Somehow, her study notes kept disappearing right before exams. Another classmate who was being considered for the same research position had her recommendation letters mysteriously delayed. I could never prove Stephanie was involved, but the timing was always suspicious. Amy's stories revealed a pattern that went back years. Stephanie had a gift for appearing supportive while systematically undermining anyone she perceived as competition or threat. She was particularly vicious toward women who had something she wanted, whether it was academic achievement, romantic attention, or family favor. The scariest part, Amy continued, was how good she was at making herself look like the victim. She would create problems and then swoop in to solve them, making everyone grateful for her intervention. Armed with this new understanding, Marcus and I started digging deeper into recent events. We discovered that my financial problems were even worse than I had realized. Credit cards that I rarely used were suddenly maxed out with charges I didn't recognize. When I called the companies, I learned that someone with access to my personal information had been making online purchases and cash advances. The billing addresses were all traced back to post office boxes that had been rented with fake identification, but the timing coincided perfectly with family gatherings where Stephanie would have had access to my purse and personal documents. The housing situation became critical when my landlord called with an eviction notice. He explained that he had received an anonymous tip about me being dangerous and unstable, complete with links to the viral video and copies of the restraining order paperwork. The caller had claimed I was a threat to other tenants and had suggested that keeping me in the building could create liability issues. My landlord, who had been perfectly happy with me as a tenant for 3 years, suddenly became nervous and decided not to renew my lease. As I prepared to challenge the eviction, I made a discovery that changed everything about how I understood my miscarriages. While cleaning out old photos for my legal case, I found screenshots of text conversations from 2 years ago. In one exchange, I had confided in Stephanie about some spotting I was experiencing during my first pregnancy. Her response, which I had forgotten in my grief, was chilling. "Maybe it's for the best, Jess. You're not ready to be a mom, and babies are expensive." This could be convenient timing. At the time, I had dismissed it as awkward phrasing during a difficult situation. Now, I saw it for what it really was: cruel indifference to my pain and a preview of the weapon she would eventually use against me. Further investigation revealed that Stephanie had known about all 3 of my pregnancies and losses. I found old emails where I had reached out to her for medical advice about early pregnancy symptoms, messages where I had confided my fears and hopes, and even a voicemail I had left after my second miscarriage where I was sobbing and asking for her support as both my sister and a doctor. She had never once called me back or offered comfort. Instead, she had filed away my pain like ammunition for future use. The realization of Stephanie's motivation was almost more devastating than the sabotage itself. Growing up, I had always been the artistic one, the creative dreamer who saw beauty in everything. While Stephanie excelled in academics and followed traditional paths to success, I had built a career around imagination and innovation. My design work had won several awards, and I had been featured in local magazines for my unique aesthetic vision. I had always assumed Stephanie looked down on my career as frivolous, but now I understood that she had been jealous of my creative freedom and independence. Her pregnancy wasn't just about becoming a mother, it was about securing her position as the family favorite permanently. In my parents' traditional mindset, Stephanie's achievement of marriage, medical career, and now motherhood made her the clear winner in their mental competition between their daughters. My artistic success, my independence, and my refusal to follow conventional timelines had always made them uncomfortable. The miscarriages gave Stephanie the perfect opportunity to position herself as the stable, successful daughter while painting me as the troubled, unstable one. That night, as I sat in my car because I literally had nowhere else to go, I realized I was facing a choice. I could continue to be Stephanie's victim, letting her destroy my life piece by piece while my family watched and cheered. Or I could fight back. The support group Dr. Williams had recommended was meeting the next morning, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I decided to stop trying to win my family's approval and start trying to save myself. The pregnancy loss support group met in the basement of a community center every Wednesday morning. Walking into that room was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the beginning of my salvation. There were 8 women in the circle that day, ranging in age from early 20s to late 40s, all united by the invisible grief that society doesn't know how to acknowledge. The facilitator, a gentle woman named Carol who had lost twins at 26 weeks, created a space where pain didn't have to be minimized or explained away. I met Sarah and Linda that first day, and their stories helped me understand that family betrayal around pregnancy loss was more common than I had imagined. Sarah's mother-in-law had told everyone at a family reunion about her miscarriage, turning her private grief into public entertainment. Linda's sister had stolen her baby names and used them for her own children, claiming she was honoring Linda's losses while actually erasing them. These women taught me that the trauma wasn't just about losing babies, it was about losing trust, support, and safety in our closest relationships. More importantly, they taught me practical strategies for fighting back. Sarah had successfully sued her mother-in-law for emotional distress and won a significant settlement. Linda had documented every instance of harassment and manipulation, eventually getting a restraining order against her own sister. They connected me with lawyers who specialized in family abuse cases and helped me understand the legal definitions of harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. For the first time in months, I felt like I was part of a team instead of fighting alone. The group helped me understand that seeking justice wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting myself and preventing Stephanie from hurting others. They also helped me process the complicated grief of mourning not just my babies but also the family relationships I had thought were real. My transformation began with small acts of self-protection. I stopped checking the viral video or reading comments about it. I blocked family members on social media who had shared or liked Stephanie's post. Most importantly, I stopped seeking my family's approval or understanding. For 28 years, I had been trying to earn love that was conditional on my willingness to accept less than I deserved. Now I was ready to demand better. The documentation phase was crucial. With the support group's guidance, I started keeping detailed records of every instance of harassment, sabotage, and manipulation. I screenshot social media posts, saved voicemails, and printed emails. I created a timeline that showed the pattern of escalation and the coordinated nature of Stephanie's campaign against me. The evidence was overwhelming when viewed as a complete picture rather than isolated incidents. My first counterattack came when I discovered that Stephanie had made a crucial mistake. The viral video had been posted from her professional social media account, the one linked to her medical practice and hospital affiliation. This meant that her cruel caption and the manipulated footage violated several professional ethics codes for physicians. I filed a complaint with the state medical board, providing evidence of how she had used her medical degree to lend credibility to her harassment campaign. The medical board investigation had immediate consequences. Stephanie's hospital launched its own internal investigation, and she was temporarily suspended from patient care pending review. Her medical malpractice insurance company also flagged the case as a potential liability issue. Within weeks, she was forced to retain an attorney and was facing possible professional sanctions that could affect her license. But Stephanie's response to my counterattack revealed just how dangerous she truly was. Instead of backing down, she escalated even further. She created multiple fake social media accounts and began posting increasingly unhinged claims about my mental state. She told neighbors that I had threatened to kidnap her baby. She called the police with false reports about suspicious activity near her house, always timing the calls for when I was in the general area for legitimate reasons. The most disturbing escalation came when she attempted to frame me for threatening her. She sent her self-threatening text messages from a burner phone, then reported them to police as evidence that I was violating the restraining order. Her plan might have worked if she hadn't made two critical errors. She forgot to disguise her writing style, and she was careless about the phone's purchase records. The detective assigned to investigate the threats, Officer Martinez, was thorough and experienced. He noticed that the threatening messages used specific medical terminology and phrasing patterns that matched Stephanie's documented communications. More damning, the burner phone had been purchased with a credit card tied to an account Stephanie shared with her husband Robert. When confronted with this evidence, Robert was forced to admit that Stephanie had been acting erratically and that their marriage was in serious trouble. This revelation cracked the facade Stephanie had worked so hard to maintain. Robert, who had been publicly supportive of his wife throughout the controversy, privately reached out to Marcus and admitted that he was having serious doubts about Stephanie's version of events. He revealed that she had been obsessively monitoring my social media, talking constantly about ways to protect herself from my supposed threats, and becoming increasingly paranoid about her image and reputation. The family dynamics began shifting as well. Several extended family members who had initially supported Stephanie started asking uncomfortable questions about her behavior. Aunt Maria, who had shared the viral video, called to apologize after learning about the medical board investigation. Cousin Felipe, who worked in law enforcement, privately expressed concerns about the pattern of false reports Stephanie had been filing. Most significantly, my father started showing cracks in his support for Stephanie. The evidence of the burner phone scheme disturbed him deeply, especially when he realized it could have resulted in false criminal charges against me. For the first time since this nightmare began, he called me directly to express doubts about what he had been told. "Jessica," he said quietly, "I'm starting to think we don't know the whole story." The professional vindication felt incredible when it came. 3 former clients reached out to apologize and offered to restore their contracts after learning about the harassment campaign. One client, who owned a women's nonprofit organization, was particularly supportive and offered me a major project designing materials for their annual fundraising campaign. Local media picked up the story of the medical board investigation, and suddenly I was being portrayed as the victim rather than the villain. But even as I celebrated these small victories, I knew that Stephanie wasn't finished. Her desperation was growing as her reputation crumbled, and desperate people do dangerous things. The final confrontation was coming, and I needed to be prepared for whatever she might try next. The legal machinery moved slowly but inexorably in my favor. With the evidence I had compiled and the support of experienced attorneys, I filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Stephanie that included charges for defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. The copyright infringement case for my stolen designs was filed separately but simultaneously, creating a two-pronged legal attack that Stephanie's attorneys struggled to defend against. The stolen design work had been the easiest case to prove. Several of my original digital files had been copied from the cloud account that my family shared for photos. Stephanie had sold them to medical conferences and pharmaceutical companies as her own work, earning thousands of dollars from my creativity. The metadata on the files clearly showed the original creation dates and my authorship, making her theft undeniable. But Stephanie's desperation led to increasingly reckless behavior that ultimately sealed her fate. Her attempt to fake threats from me using the burner phone had backfired spectacularly when police traced the purchase back to her account. Now she tried an even more elaborate deception. She staged a vandalism incident at her car, scratching profanities into the paint and placing dead flowers on the windshield, then called police claiming I had done it in violation of the restraining order. Her plan was sophisticated and might have worked if not for 2 factors she hadn't considered. First, the security cameras at her office building captured everything, including footage of her arriving early in the morning with the flowers and vandalism materials. Second, I had an airtight alibi. At the exact time she claimed I was vandalizing her car, I was in Dr. Williams' office for my weekly therapy session, a fact easily verified by appointment records and building security footage. When police confronted Stephanie with the evidence of her deception, she broke down completely. The stress of maintaining her lies, combined with pregnancy hormones and the pressure of multiple investigations, finally overwhelmed her carefully controlled facade. She admitted to staging the vandalism but claimed it was because she was terrified of me and needed police to take her seriously. This admission created additional legal problems, as filing false police reports is a criminal offense. Robert reached his breaking point when he learned about the staged vandalism. He had been trying to maintain their marriage for the sake of their unborn child, but the pattern of lies and manipulation had become impossible to ignore. Their relationship had been deteriorating for months as more evidence of Stephanie's deceptions came to light. He filed for divorce and immediate separation, seeking full custody of their child due to concerns about Stephanie's mental stability and pattern of dishonest behavior. The family fractures became irreparable when Dad finally confronted Mom about her role in enabling Stephanie's behavior. Armed with evidence of years of manipulation and the recent criminal acts, he demanded that she acknowledge her favoritism and its consequences. Mom, who had spent decades viewing Stephanie as the perfect daughter, couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of accepting that her golden child was capable of such cruelty. Their confrontation was explosive and long overdue. Dad accused Mom of willful blindness, pointing out that she had dismissed every red flag and enabled increasingly destructive behavior. "Diana," he said, "you've been so determined to have a perfect daughter that you ignored what she was actually becoming. And you threw Jessica away like garbage in the process." Mom's response revealed the depth of her denial. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, she insisted that Stephanie was just stressed by pregnancy and that I was somehow responsible for pushing her to these extremes. Extended family members began taking sides as more details became public. The medical board investigation had drawn local media attention, and suddenly our family drama was front-page news in the community where my parents had lived for 30 years. Neighbors who had known us since childhood were shocked by the revelations about Stephanie's behavior. Many reached out to me privately to express support and share their own observations about troubling incidents they had witnessed but dismissed at the time. The professional consequences for Stephanie continued mounting. Her hospital terminated her employment after the criminal charges were filed, citing violation of ethical standards and moral turpitude clauses in her contract. Her medical license was suspended pending the outcome of both criminal and civil proceedings. The pharmaceutical companies who had purchased my stolen designs demanded refunds and threatened their own legal action. In a matter of months, she went from being a successful physician to facing career-ending professional sanctions. My own professional rehabilitation accelerated as the truth became known. The nonprofit client who had supported me connected me with other women-owned businesses and advocacy organizations. Word spread through this network about both my skills as a designer and my experience surviving family abuse. I began receiving contracts specifically from organizations that wanted to support women entrepreneurs and domestic violence survivors. One particularly meaningful project came from a fertility clinic that specialized in pregnancy loss support. They asked me to design their entire visual identity, from logo to patient education materials. Working on this project felt like completing a circle, using my creative skills to help other women navigate the same pain I had experienced. The clinic director, who was familiar with my story, told me that seeing someone thrive after such public trauma gave hope to their patients. But the victory that meant the most came when several extended family members who had initially sided with Stephanie reached out to apologize and rebuild relationships with me. Uncle Carlos, who had shared the viral video, deleted it from his social media and posted a public apology acknowledging that he had been manipulated by false information. Cousin Elena, who had made cruel comments about my miscarriages, attended one of my support group meetings to better understand pregnancy loss and its impact on families. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive once people understood what had really happened. Local women's organizations invited me to speak about surviving family abuse and the importance of supporting mothers experiencing pregnancy loss. These speaking opportunities helped me process my trauma while building a platform to help other women facing similar situations. As we approached the court date for the final legal proceedings, Stephanie made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She contacted me directly, violating the restraining order in a tearful phone call where she claimed her pregnancy complications were caused by the stress of our legal battle. "Jessica," she sobbed, "I'm sorry for everything, but you need to drop the charges. The stress is killing my baby, and you'll have another death on your conscience." The manipulation was so transparent and cruel that I hung up immediately, but not before recording the conversation as evidence of continued harassment and emotional abuse. The courthouse was packed on the morning of our final hearing. What had started as a private family dispute had become a public case study in family abuse, professional ethics, and the vulnerability of women experiencing pregnancy loss. Local news stations had picked up the story, framing it as an examination of how social media could be weaponized for personal destruction and how professional credentials could be misused for manipulation. I arrived with Marcus and Dr. Williams, who would be testifying as an expert witness about the psychological impact of the harassment campaign. My legal team was confident but cautious. Stephanie's attorneys had been trying for weeks to negotiate a settlement that would avoid public testimony, suggesting they knew their client's position was weak. I had refused all settlement offers that didn't include full public vindication and accountability for the damage done to my reputation and career. Stephanie arrived looking dramatically different from the composed professional who had started this war. Pregnancy had changed her physically, but stress had aged her in more profound ways. Her husband Robert was notably absent, their divorce proceedings having revealed the extent of her manipulative behavior to someone who had lived with her daily. She was accompanied only by her attorney and our mother, who still maintained her denial about her daughter's actions despite overwhelming evidence. The prosecution of the criminal charges proceeded first. The district attorney's office had decided to pursue charges for filing false police reports, identity fraud related to the burner phone scheme, and criminal harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage of her staging the car vandalism, phone records showing her purchase and use of the burner phone, and documented patterns of harassment spanning months. During cross-examination, Stephanie's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. When confronted with the security footage showing her vandalizing her own car, she initially tried to deny it was her despite clear facial recognition. When pressed about the burner phone records, she claimed someone else must have used her credit card, an explanation that fell apart under scrutiny. Most damaging was when the prosecutor asked her to explain the medical terminology in the fake threatening messages that matched her documented writing patterns exactly. Dr. Martinez, the prosecutor said, "Can you explain how someone threatening you would know to use the phrase obstetric complications in their message, given that this is specific medical terminology that appeared in your own case notes from the same week?" Stephanie's response was incoherent, a rambling explanation about how I must have researched medical terms to make the threats seem authentic. The jury looked skeptical, and several were openly shaking their heads at her increasingly desperate explanations. The moment of complete breakdown came when Stephanie was asked directly about her motivation for the harassment campaign. Under oath, with nowhere left to hide, years of resentment poured out in a torrent of honesty that her attorneys couldn't stop. "She never deserved any of it," Stephanie said, her voice rising with decades of suppressed rage. The attention, the artistic recognition, the way people praised her creativity like it mattered more than saving lives. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition she got just for being different and artistic. The courtroom fell silent as she continued, her admission becoming more damaging with every word. When she told us about the miscarriages, I saw an opportunity to finally show everyone who the real victim was. She was always the one people felt sorry for, always the one who got sympathy for her problems while I was expected to be perfect. For once, I could be the one who deserved support and protection. The prosecution didn't need to ask another question. Stephanie had confessed not just to the specific charges but to a deliberate campaign of psychological warfare motivated by lifelong jealousy. The civil trial proceeded immediately afterward, and the evidence there was equally damning. The financial fraud was proven through credit card records and surveillance footage from stores where purchases were made. The professional sabotage was documented through saved voicemails and emails Stephanie had sent to my clients. Most powerfully, we presented testimony from former colleagues and acquaintances going back to medical school who confirmed the pattern of manipulative and destructive behavior that Amy had first described. Robert's testimony was particularly devastating for Stephanie's case. As her soon-to-be ex-husband, he had intimate knowledge of her private thoughts and motivations. He testified about her obsessive monitoring of my social media, her planning sessions for ways to damage my reputation, and her celebration when clients canceled contracts with me. She kept a notebook, he revealed, with plans for different ways to destroy Jessica's business. She called it her reality check project because she said Jessica needed to learn that the real world doesn't reward dreamers. The financial damages were substantial. Between lost contracts, legal fees, therapy costs, and the expense of rebuilding my professional reputation, the total exceeded 6 figures. More importantly, the court awarded punitive damages designed to punish Stephanie's particularly malicious behavior and deter others from similar harassment campaigns. The judge's comments during sentencing were scathing, describing Stephanie's actions as a calculated assault on a vulnerable family member using professional credentials as weapons. The most emotional moment came when I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. Standing at the podium, looking at the sister who had tormented me for months, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, anger, and relief. "Stephanie," I said, "I wanted your love and support during the hardest time of my life. Instead, you turned my grief into entertainment and my vulnerability into opportunity. You didn't just attack me, you attacked every woman who has ever lost a pregnancy and feared being judged for it." I talked about the nights I had considered suicide, the professional relationships that might never be fully repaired, and the trust in family relationships that had been permanently shattered. But I also talked about the strength I had discovered, the community I had found, and the purpose that had emerged from surviving her assault. "You tried to destroy me," I concluded, "but you actually freed me from a toxic family system that I never recognized until you forced me to see it clearly." The judge sentenced Stephanie to probation, community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. She was also ordered to pay full restitution and was prohibited from any contact with me or my business associates. Her medical license was permanently revoked, ending the career she had worked so hard to build. Most satisfying to me was the requirement that she issue a public apology and retraction, acknowledging that the viral video had been manipulated and that her claims about my behavior had been false. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The legal victory was important, but more significant was the validation that my reality was real, my pain was legitimate, and my fight for justice was righteous. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked into the sunshine, and I realized that this ending was actually a beginning. The aftermath of the trial brought consequences that rippled through every aspect of Stephanie's life and began the healing process for mine. The state medical board's final ruling came down 3 weeks after the criminal conviction, permanently revoking Stephanie's license to practice medicine. The board's statement cited gross unprofessional conduct and conduct demonstrating moral turpitude as grounds for revocation, specifically noting that her abuse of medical knowledge and credentials to harass a family member represented a fundamental violation of physician ethics. The professional consequences extended beyond just her medical license. The pharmaceutical companies who had unknowingly purchased my stolen designs demanded full restitution and filed their own civil suits for fraud and copyright infringement. Her professional liability insurance dropped her coverage, leaving her personally responsible for all damages. Within 6 months of the trial, Stephanie faced bankruptcy as legal fees and judgments accumulated beyond her ability to pay. Her marriage to Robert officially ended in a divorce that made local headlines due to its connection to our case. The custody proceedings revealed additional disturbing patterns of behavior that I hadn't been aware of during the harassment campaign. Robert testified that Stephanie had been secretly recording conversations with friends and family members, collecting what she called insurance information for future use. She had files on everyone in her life, documenting weaknesses and secrets that could potentially be weaponized if needed. Most shocking was Robert's revelation about her pregnancy. Medical records introduced during the custody hearing showed that Stephanie had been experiencing complications that she had hidden from family and friends. The stress of maintaining her deception campaign, combined with the legal proceedings, had created health risks for both her and the baby. Robert's attorney argued that her pattern of dishonesty and manipulation made her unfit for primary custody, especially given her attempts to use the pregnancy as leverage in legal proceedings. The baby, a daughter they named Isabella, was born prematurely but healthy. The custody arrangement gave Robert primary physical custody with supervised visitation for Stephanie until she completed a comprehensive psychological evaluation and treatment program. Watching from a distance, I felt complex emotions about my niece. Isabella was innocent in all of this, but the circumstances of her birth were forever entangled with the destruction of our family. My own family's response to the trial outcome revealed the depth of the dysfunction that had enabled Stephanie's behavior for years. Mom remained in complete denial, insisting that Stephanie was the real victim and that the legal system had been manipulated by my lies and manipulation. She refused to acknowledge any evidence of Stephanie's wrongdoing and cut off contact with me entirely when I wouldn't agree that the prosecution had been unfair. Dad's response was more complex and ultimately more hopeful. The evidence presented during the trial forced him to confront his own role in enabling Stephanie's behavior and dismissing my concerns for years. He entered counseling and gradually began rebuilding a relationship with me based on accountability and changed behavior rather than just apologies. Our conversations were difficult and sometimes painful, but they were honest in a way our family relationships had never been before. The most painful realization was that the family I had been fighting to maintain didn't actually exist. The loving, supportive family unit I remembered from childhood had been built on a foundation of favoritism, denial, and conditional love. Stephanie's campaign against me hadn't created these dysfunctions, it had simply revealed them in their most extreme form. Accepting this reality was devastating but also liberating, freeing me from the exhausting effort of trying to earn love from people who weren't capable of giving it unconditionally. My professional life rebounded dramatically as news of the trial outcome spread through my business network. Several high-profile clients reached out specifically because they wanted to support someone who had survived family abuse and fought back successfully. The women's organizations that had initially hired me began referring other clients, creating a network of socially conscious businesses who valued both my design skills and my personal story of resilience. One particularly meaningful opportunity came from a national organization focused on pregnancy and infant loss support. They asked me to design materials for a campaign challenging the stigma around miscarriage and promoting honest conversations about reproductive health. Working on this project felt like transforming my pain into purpose, using my experience to help other women feel less alone in their grief. The most unexpected development was meeting David, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and had been following my case through professional journals about family abuse patterns. We met at a conference where I was speaking about surviving harassment campaigns, and our initial professional conversation gradually developed into a personal relationship. David understood the complexities of family trauma in ways that most people couldn't, and his support was based on real understanding rather than just sympathy. 6 months after the trial, I discovered I was pregnant again. The news brought a complex mixture of joy and terror, hope and grief. My previous losses had left me afraid to celebrate or make plans, and the stress of the past year had convinced me that my chances of carrying a healthy pregnancy to term were minimal. But this time I wasn't facing the journey alone. David was supportive and understanding, Dr. Williams helped me navigate the anxiety and triggers, and my support group provided a community of women who understood exactly what I was feeling. Meanwhile, Stephanie's court-ordered psychological treatment was revealing the extent of her mental health issues. The therapist's reports, which were part of the custody proceedings and therefore public record, described narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. The years of being praised as the perfect daughter had prevented her from developing healthy coping mechanisms for disappointment or criticism, leading to increasingly manipulative and destructive behavior when her sense of superiority was threatened. The community response to our story had broader implications beyond just our family. Local domestic violence organizations began including information about family abuse and sibling harassment in their educational materials. The medical community used Stephanie's case as an example in ethics training, highlighting how professional credentials could be misused for personal vendettas. Most importantly, pregnancy loss support groups started addressing the additional trauma that can occur when families respond poorly to miscarriage and infant death. As I prepared for this new pregnancy while continuing to build my business and advocacy work, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. A year earlier, I had been a struggling freelancer desperate for my family's approval and support. Now I was a successful business owner with a platform for helping other abuse survivors, surrounded by people who valued me for who I actually was rather than who they wanted me to be. The transformation had come through unimaginable pain, but it had led to a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had experienced before. 1 year after the trial, I welcomed my daughter Emma into the world. Her birth was attended by the family I had chosen: David, Dr. Williams, Marcus, and several women from my support group who had become close friends. The delivery room was filled with people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life and were now celebrating the joy that emerged from survival and healing. The contrast with Stephanie's experience couldn't have been starker. While I was surrounded by love and authentic support, she remained isolated by her own choices and behavior. Her supervised visits with Isabella were monitored by court-appointed social workers, and her relationship with our parents had deteriorated as the reality of her actions became impossible to deny even for Mom's persistent delusions. Mom made one last attempt at reconciliation when Emma was born, sending a card with a generic message about new babies being blessings. Inside, she had written a note suggesting that, now that we're both mothers, perhaps we could find a way to put the past behind us. The message revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what had happened and what healing would require. Putting the past behind us would have meant accepting abuse and manipulation as normal family dynamics, something I was no longer willing to do. I responded with a letter explaining that reconciliation would require acknowledgement of harm caused, acceptance of responsibility, and demonstrated changed behavior over time. I wasn't asking for groveling or dramatic gestures, but I needed basic accountability and respect for my boundaries. Mom's response made it clear that she wasn't capable of meeting these minimum requirements, choosing instead to maintain her narrative that Stephanie was the real victim and I was the ungrateful daughter who had destroyed our family. The decision to maintain no contact with Mom and Stephanie was difficult but necessary for my mental health and for protecting Emma from toxic family dynamics. I wanted my daughter to grow up understanding that love is demonstrated through actions, not words, and that family relationships must be based on mutual respect and kindness. She would never have to earn affection by accepting mistreatment or diminishing herself to make others feel superior. Dad's journey toward accountability and change continued slowly but consistently. He attended therapy, participated in family abuse education programs, and gradually earned back trust through changed behavior rather than just apologies. His relationship with Emma was supervised and limited at first, but as he demonstrated real understanding of his past failures and commitment to different behavior, we carefully expanded his involvement in our lives. The most powerful moment of healing came when Dad attended one of Emma's doctor appointments and witnessed firsthand the joy and celebration around her milestones. "Jessica," he said afterward, "I realize now how much I missed with you because I was so focused on Stephanie's achievements. I don't know how to fix the past, but I want to be the grandfather to Emma that I should have been as a father to you." His words couldn't undo decades of favoritism and neglect, but they represented genuine recognition of harm and commitment to change. My business continued growing as I specialized in working with organizations focused on women's empowerment, family abuse prevention, and reproductive health advocacy. The combination of my design skills and personal experience created a unique perspective that resonated with clients doing meaningful work in these areas. I was able to charge premium rates while working on projects that felt personally fulfilling and socially important. Speaking engagements became a regular part of my work as organizations invited me to share my story at conferences about family abuse, pregnancy loss, and business resilience. These presentations helped me process my own trauma while providing hope and practical strategies to other women facing similar situations. The most rewarding feedback came from women who said my story had given them permission to set boundaries with toxic family members or seek help for harassment they had been enduring in silence. The pregnancy loss support group that had been so crucial to my survival became a permanent part of my life as I transitioned from participant to co-facilitator. Helping newly grieving women navigate their pain while sharing my experience of rebuilding after loss felt like the most meaningful work I could do. Emma sometimes came to meetings when childcare fell through, and seeing a healthy baby born after multiple losses gave hope to women who worried they would never become mothers. Stephanie's story became a cautionary tale in our community about the dangers of untreated narcissism and the importance of family systems that prioritize truth over image management. Her fall from respected physician to convicted criminal was swift and complete, but the psychological evaluation reports suggested that she still maintained limited insight into her own behavior patterns. The court-ordered therapy was helping with basic impulse control, but deeper personality change remained questionable. The broader impact of our story extended beyond just our family or local community. Legal scholars wrote about the case as an example of how social media could be weaponized for domestic abuse, leading to stronger protections for harassment victims and better training for law enforcement about technology-facilitated abuse. Medical ethics boards used Stephanie's case in professional development training, emphasizing the importance of maintaining professional boundaries even within family relationships. 3 years after Emma's birth, I reflected on the journey from that devastating family dinner to the life I had built through survival and intentional choices. The woman who had sat at that table desperate for her family's approval and understanding was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. The transformation had required losing everything I thought I wanted in order to discover what I actually needed. The greatest wisdom I gained was understanding that some relationships cannot and should not be saved. The cultural pressure to forgive family members and maintain connections regardless of their behavior had kept me trapped in a cycle of abuse and disappointment for years. Learning to prioritize my own well-being and Emma's healthy development over maintaining toxic relationships was difficult but essential for true healing. Emma would grow up hearing age-appropriate stories about why certain family members weren't part of our lives, always with the message that love is demonstrated through kindness, respect, and protection. She would never be taught that being family gave someone unlimited permission to hurt her or that maintaining relationships was more important than maintaining her dignity and safety. As I watch Emma play in our garden while I work on designs for a new domestic violence prevention campaign, I often think about the question that started this whole journey: when's your turn, Jessica? The answer I gave that night was about pregnancy loss, but the real answer was more complex. My turn had come when I stopped waiting for permission to value myself and started building a life based on authenticity rather than approval. My turn was when I chose healing over denial, growth over comfort, and truth over family loyalty. The perfect family I had always wanted existed now, just not in the way I had originally imagined. It consisted of people who had chosen to love and support each other without conditions or competition. Some were related by blood, others by choice, but all were connected by mutual respect and genuine care. Emma was growing up in this environment of authentic love, and that was the greatest victory of all. To everyone watching who has ever felt invisible in their own family, who has experienced the devastating silence around pregnancy loss, or who is currently surviving a harassment campaign designed to destroy them, your pain is real, your fight for dignity is justified, and your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we were born into, but the one we create through courage, boundaries, and the willingness to demand better. What's your experience with toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining relationships and protecting your mental health? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your story matters too. If this video helped you feel less alone in your struggle, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories of survival and empowerment. Remember that healing is possible, justice sometimes comes, and you deserve relationships built on love rather than manipulation. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to write your own ending filled with authenticity, respect, and genuine love.